Leo Martinez straightened the knot on his tie for what felt like the 100th time. It was the only silk tie he owned, a deep navy blue that his mother had given him for his college graduation. It felt like a relic from a different life, a life full of promise that had not yet materialized. His reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed a young man with earnest eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. His suit, meticulously pressed but showing the subtle sheen of age at the elbows and cuffs, was his suit of armor. Today it had to be enough. Today was the day he would interview for the junior project manager position at Vance Innovations, the titan of tech and engineering in the city. A job there was not just a job, it was a lifeline. He glanced at the eviction notice taped to his refrigerator, a stark white reminder of his reality. He was 2 months behind on rent, and his landlord's patience had worn thin. He was supporting his younger sister through nursing school, a promise he had made to their parents before they passed. The weight of that promise felt heavier each morning. This interview was his only shot at pulling them back from the brink. Failure was not an option he could afford to entertain. He took a deep breath, grabbed his worn leather portfolio from the rickety kitchen table, and walked out the door, the click of the lock echoing with a finality that made his stomach clench. The drive across town was a nerve-wracking crawl through morning traffic. Every red light felt like a personal affront, every slow driver a saboteur of his future. He kept glancing at the clock on his dashboard, its glowing red numbers mocking his anxiety. He had left with what should have been plenty of time, but the city seemed to have conspired against him. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of his old, sputtering sedan, rehearsing his answers, trying to project a confidence he did not feel. "My greatest strength is my perseverance," he muttered to himself. "I see a problem through to its conclusion, no matter the obstacles." Just as he turned onto the final boulevard leading towards the gleaming glass spire of the Vance Innovations Tower, he saw it. A magnificent vintage car, a classic Bentley the color of deep emerald, was pulled over onto the shoulder. Its hazard lights blinked in a slow, mournful rhythm. Standing beside it was an elderly man. His shoulders slumped in defeat as he stared at a hopelessly flat rear tire. The man wore a simple tweed jacket and slacks, looking more like a retired professor than the owner of such a luxurious vehicle. He seemed lost, frail, and utterly alone on the busy stretch of road. Leo's first instinct was to drive on. He couldn't. He was already cutting it dangerously close. The Vance Tower was visible just a few blocks away, a shimmering beacon of his potential future. Helping this man would take at least 20 minutes, maybe more. He would be late. He would miss his chance. His mind screamed at him to keep going, to be selfish for once in his life. The eviction notice flashed in his mind's eye. His sister's tuition bill. The gnawing emptiness of his bank account. But then he looked again at the old man, who was now fumbling with a phone, his brow furrowed in confused frustration. He reminded Leo of his grandfather in his final years, struggling with a world that was moving too fast for him. A wave of empathy washed over him, extinguishing the fire of his ambition. He thought of the words he had just been rehearsing. "I see a problem through to its conclusion." What a hypocrite he would be if he drove past this one. With a groan of resignation, he flicked on his turn signal and pulled his battered car onto the shoulder behind the Bentley. The old man looked up, startled, as Leo got out. "Everything all right, sir?" Leo asked, his voice calm despite the frantic pounding in his chest. "Oh dear," the man sighed, his voice raspy with age. "I seem to have a flat. I'm afraid I haven't changed a tire in, well, a very long time. I can't seem to get a signal on this newfangled device to call for assistance." Leo glanced at the magnificent car, then back at his own modest suit. "I have an important appointment," he said, more to himself than to the man. "But I can't just leave you here." He took off his suit jacket, folded it carefully, and placed it in his car. "Let's see what you've got in the trunk." The old man, whose name was Arthur, watched with a mixture of relief and curiosity as Leo efficiently located the spare and the jack. The younger man rolled up his sleeves and got to work without another word of complaint. He wrestled with the lug nuts, which were stiff with age and disuse. Sweat beaded on his forehead, mixing with the grime from the tire. He could feel the minutes ticking away, each one a nail in the coffin of his dream job. He tried not to look at his watch. He tried not to think about the empty interview chair waiting for him in that gleaming tower. As he worked, Arthur made small talk. "You're very kind to stop. Most people would have just driven by. My father taught me to never leave someone stranded if you have the ability to help." Leo grunted, giving a final, mighty heave on the wrench. The last lug nut came loose. He worked quickly, jacking up the car, swapping the tires, and lowering it back down. His hands were now black with grease, and a dark smudge streaked across his crisp white shirt. He looked a mess. He looked like anything but a promising candidate for a corporate position. When he was finished, he wiped his hands on a rag from his own trunk. "There you go, sir. This spare should get you to a proper garage." Arthur looked at Leo, his gaze taking in the young man's disheveled state. He saw the grease on his shirt, the sweat on his brow, and the deep, profound disappointment that had now settled in his eyes. The panic was gone, replaced by a quiet resignation. "Thank you, son. Truly. I don't know what I would have done. You've soiled your clothes. Let me at least pay for the cleaning." He reached for his wallet. "No, sir. That's not necessary," Leo said, forcing a smile. He knew it was over. He was impossibly late. There was no point in even trying to show up now. Just pay it forward sometime. "You said you had an important appointment," Arthur said gently. "I'm afraid I've made you late for it." Leo just shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I didn't just get made late, sir. I missed it entirely. But some things are more important." He wasn't sure if he believed his own words, but he said them anyway. He offered a final nod, got back into his car, and drove away, not towards the Vance Tower, but back towards his shabby apartment and the eviction notice on his fridge. He felt the full, crushing weight of his decision settle upon him, a burden far heavier than any flat tire. He had chosen kindness over opportunity, and in his world, that felt like a catastrophic mistake. Arthur Vance sat in the back of the town car his assistant had sent to retrieve him and the Bentley. He watched the young man's dilapidated sedan merge back into traffic and disappear. The boy's face, etched with a quiet, noble despair, was imprinted on his mind. He had seen the ambition in his eyes when he first pulled over, the internal war he was fighting, and he had seen him choose decency. It was a quality Arthur had not witnessed up close in a very long time. He looked down at his own clean hands, then at the grease-smudged business card the roadside assistance driver had given him, and felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Felt like shame. Back in his penthouse office on the top floor of the Vance Innovations Tower, the world was a silent, orderly kingdom under his command. The city spread out below him like a circuit board, a complex system of moving parts he had mastered long ago. But today, the view brought him no satisfaction. He felt a profound disconnect from it all. He was Arthur Vance, the architect of this empire, a man whose name was synonymous with power and ruthless efficiency. Yet an hour ago, he was just a helpless old man on the side of the road, and his power had meant nothing. He walked over to a heavy mahogany credenza and opened a small, locked drawer. Inside was a simple, silver-framed photograph of a woman with kind, laughing eyes and a warm smile. Eleanor, his late wife. She had been the heart of his world, the moral compass that had guided him before grief and the demands of the business had encased him in ice. He picked up the frame, his thumb tracing the cool glass over her face. "You see, Ellie," he whispered to the photograph, "there are still good people in the world." Eleanor had always been the one to see the person behind the resume, the character behind the credentials. "A man's worth isn't in his bank account, Arthur," she used to say, her hand on his arm. "It's in what he does when he thinks no one is watching." For years, he had forgotten that. He had promoted the ruthless, the ambitious, the ones who reminded him of his younger self. He had built a company of sharks, and now he was tired of swimming in those waters. The young man on the side of the road, he was something different. He was something Eleanor would have liked. His intercom buzzed, and the crisp voice of his executive assistant, Helen, filled the room. "Mr. Vance, your 9 o'clock interview is here. A Mr. Marcus Thorne. Your 9:30 candidate, a Leo Martinez, was a no-show." Arthur's blood ran cold. Leo Martinez. He didn't know the name, but the timing was a thunderclap of realization. The 9:30 slot, the important appointment, the soiled suit, couldn't be a coincidence. The young man who had sacrificed his own monumental opportunity to help a stranger was the same young man who was supposed to be interviewing with him. "Send Mr. Thorne in, Helen," Arthur said, his voice even, betraying none of the storm raging inside him. He placed Eleanor's photograph back on the credenza, facing him. Marcus Thorne strode into the office with the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a real obstacle in his life. His suit was impossibly sharp, his handshake firm, his smile predatory. He was polished, articulate, and everything that a board of directors would love. He answered every question perfectly, peppering his speech with corporate jargon and strategic buzzwords. He was the ideal candidate on paper. To Arthur, he suddenly seemed like a caricature. "We have to be agile, proactive, and willing to trim the fat to maximize shareholder value," Marcus said, his eyes gleaming. "Sentimentality has no place in a competitive market. You have to be willing to make the tough calls, to cut loose any dead weight, whether it's an underperforming division or an employee who can't keep up." Arthur listened, his expression unreadable. He thought of Leo Martinez on his knees on the grimy shoulder of the road, tightening lug nuts for a stranger. That was a tough call, too. A call that Marcus Thorne, in his $1,000 suit, would never in a million years have made. "One of your competitors for this position failed to even show up this morning," Arthur said, his voice deceptively casual. "What does that say to you?" Marcus let out a short, dismissive laugh. "It says he's unprofessional, disorganized, lacks the fundamental respect for other people's time that is essential in this business. Frankly, Mr. Vance, it tells me he saved you the trouble of finding out he wasn't right for the job." Arthur nodded slowly. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thorne. We'll be in touch." As soon as Marcus had left, Arthur buzzed Helen again. "Get me everything you have on Leo Martinez. The resume, the cover letter, his address, his phone number. Everything. And do it quietly." "Of course, Mr. Vance," Helen replied, her tone hinting at her curiosity but remaining perfectly professional. Minutes later, the file was on his desk. Arthur opened it and saw the face from the roadside staring back at him from a small, grainy photo. Leo Martinez, graduated top of his class from a state university. A glowing letter of recommendation from a former professor who praised his work ethic and integrity. A short, handwritten note in his cover letter mentioned his desire to provide a better life for his sister. There was no family money, no legacy connections, just raw talent and a palpable sense of desperation. This was the man Marcus Thorne had dismissed as dead weight. This was the man who had missed his one shot because he was helping the very person who held his future in his hands. The irony was so thick, so profound, it almost made Arthur laugh. He closed the file. The investigation was over. Now, a different kind of work had to begin. He was no longer just the CEO conducting an interview. He was an old man who owed a young man a debt that could not be repaid with a simple job offer. The following afternoon, Arthur Vance drove his own modest sedan, not the Bentley, into a part of the city he hadn't visited in decades. The gleaming skyscrapers gave way to brick-faced apartment buildings with fire escapes zigzagging down their fronts. The streets were narrower, lined with local bodegas and laundromats instead of high-end boutiques. He found Leo's building, a tired-looking structure that had seen better days. He parked across the street and simply watched. He felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, a world of quiet struggles and simple dignities that his wealth had long insulated him from. He saw Leo leave the building not in a suit, but in jeans and a faded t-shirt. He looked younger, less burdened, but the worry was still etched around his eyes. Leo walked to a small market on the corner and came out a few minutes later with a single bag of groceries that looked painfully light. Arthur watched him walk back to his apartment, the very picture of a young man trying to make a dollar stretch into a miracle. The sight filled Arthur with a deep, aching sense of responsibility. This was the life his anonymous act of kindness had nearly shattered. He had lived a life of unimaginable privilege while Leo was counting pennies for groceries. The contrast was a physical blow. Deciding against a direct confrontation, Arthur waited. He needed a pretense, a way to enter Leo's world without the crushing weight of his corporate identity. He remembered the Bentley. That was his key. The next day, he had the car delivered to a garage near Leo's neighborhood and then called him from a disposable phone. "Leo Martinez?" Arthur said, using his frail old man voice. "This is Arthur, the man with the flat tire the other day. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Leo's voice was full of surprise. "Oh, no sir, not at all. Is everything okay with the car?" "It's fine thanks to you," Arthur said. "But listen, the mechanic tells me the old girl needs a bit more work than I thought. I was hoping I could impose on you for a bit of advice. You seem to know your way around her. I'd be happy to pay you for your time." There was a pause. "Sir, I'm not a mechanic," Leo said, hesitant. "I know, but you're an honest man and that's harder to find. Just a few minutes of your time. Please," Arthur pressed. He knew Leo's character. He wouldn't be able to refuse a direct plea for help. As predicted, Leo reluctantly agreed. They met at the garage, a greasy, cluttered space that smelled of oil and metal. For an hour, they stood over the open hood of the Bentley, with Arthur feigning ignorance and asking simple questions. It gave him the chance to observe Leo, to talk to him without the pretense of an interview. He saw the way Leo's eyes lit up when he talked about engineering challenges, the passion he had for finding solutions. "You have a good mind for this," Arthur commented, gesturing to the engine. "You see how systems work together." "I love it," Leo admitted, a genuine smile finally breaking through his worry. "It's like a puzzle, finding the one broken piece that's holding everything else back. That's what I wanted to do at Vance Innovations. Work on big projects, solve complex problems." His smile faded. "Well, that was the dream, anyway." Arthur felt a twist of guilt. "The appointment you missed," he said softly. "It was at Vance, wasn't it?" Leo nodded, his gaze distant. "The biggest interview of my life. With the man himself, I think. Arthur Vance. They say he's a legend. Tough as nails. Built the company from the ground up. Not the kind of man who tolerates people being late." He let out a humorless laugh. "I probably ended up on some corporate blacklist." The moment hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken truths. Here was Leo, lamenting his missed chance to meet the legendary Arthur Vance, completely unaware that he was standing right next to him. Arthur had to physically restrain himself from telling him the truth right then and there. It wasn't time. He needed to understand more, not just about Leo, but about the company he himself had built. Was it truly a place where a man like Leo could no longer succeed? "You know," Arthur said, his voice quiet, "sometimes the paths we think are closed are the ones that lead us exactly where we need to be." Leo looked at him, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He saw the old man's gaze, which seemed to hold a wisdom that went far beyond cars and flat tires. There was an intensity there, a strange familiarity that Leo couldn't quite place. It was in his eyes. Leo had the distinct feeling that this man saw more than just a young man in a garage. He saw right through him. "Who are you, really?" Leo asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. It was too direct, too probing, but the sense of mystery surrounding this kind, wealthy, and strangely invested old man was becoming overwhelming. Arthur was taken aback by the directness. He saw the sharp intelligence in Leo's eyes, the part of him that connected the dots, that saw the patterns. He was recognizing that something was out of place. Arthur simply offered a small, enigmatic smile. "I'm just a man who believes in paying his debts, Leo, and I owe you 1 inch." The words were a promise. A cliffhanger that left Leo more confused than ever, standing in the silence of the garage with the ghost of an opportunity he thought he had lost forever. Back within the sterile, air-conditioned walls of Vance Innovations, Marcus Thorne was enjoying his victory. He felt certain the job was his. He had charmed the CEO, projected strength, and his only serious competition had disqualified himself. He began to move with a new swagger, cultivating relationships with board members and department heads, speaking of the junior project manager role as if it were already a settled matter. But a piece of gossip he overheard in the executive lounge planted a seed of unease. "The old man has been in a strange mood," one vice president said to another over coffee. Helen said he personally requested the file on that kid who ghosted his interview. The one from the projects. Marcus's smile tightened. Why would Arthur Vance, a man who valued time and discipline above all else, waste a single thought on a no-show? It didn't make sense. It was a loose thread, and Marcus had a pathological need to pull on any loose thread until he found out what it was attached to. He decided to do some digging of his own. Using his network of contacts and a few well-placed, discreet inquiries with low-level HR staff, he started building a file on Leo Martinez. Meanwhile, Arthur was deepening his own investigation, but his focus was internal. He called in his most trusted ally in the company, his assistant of 30 years, Helen. She was sharp, fiercely loyal, and one of the few people who remembered the company before it became a corporate leviathan. She had known Eleanor well. "Helen," Arthur said, closing his office door, "I'm going to tell you a story." He recounted the entire incident of the flat tire, his meeting with Leo, and his subsequent conversations, all without revealing his final intentions. Helen listened patiently, her expression unchanging. When he finished, she simply said, "He sounds like the kind of man Eleanor would have hired on the spot." "He is," Arthur agreed. "But Marcus Thorne is the man this company is now designed to attract. And I've learned that Thorne is already making inquiries about Leo Martinez." He senses something. Arthur's jaw tightened.
Marcus is a rival.
"And men like him don't compete fairly. They eliminate." "What do you want me to do?" Helen asked. She was not just an assistant. She was his consigliera, his strategic partner in the palace intrigue of the company. "I want you to find out what Marcus is up to. I want to know who he's talking to, what he's saying. I suspect he will try to poison the well before I can even make an offer." Arthur paced the room, his anger growing. This has become more than just a job offer. It's a test of this company's soul. And I have a feeling Marcus Thorne is about to show us just how sick it has become. Helen's work was swift and discreet. Within 2 days, she came back with a report that made Arthur's blood boil. Marcus had not only been digging into Leo's life, but he had begun a subtle smear campaign. He had discovered that Leo's father had declared bankruptcy years ago after a failed small business venture. Marcus was twisting this fact, planting seeds of doubt with influential people in the company. "He's framing it as a pattern of poor financial judgment," Helen explained, her voice tight with disgust. "He's telling people that Leo comes from unstable stock and represents an unacceptable risk for a position that manages multi-million-dollar project budgets. He's presenting himself as the responsible choice, protecting the company from a potential liability." The conspiracy was more insidious than Arthur had imagined. Marcus wasn't just being competitive. He was being cruel, using the misfortunes of Leo's family as a weapon. He was attacking the very foundation of the young man's character. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. This was no longer about one job or one candidate. It was about the very values that would define the future of Vance Innovations. Arthur realized with a chilling certainty that Marcus's treachery might actually work. The board was full of men like Marcus, men who saw risk in everything except their own unchecked ambition. They would respond to Marcus's calculated, fear-mongering narrative. If Arthur were to propose hiring Leo now, he would be met with skepticism and formal opposition, all orchestrated by the man who was supposed to be his subordinate. He had to get ahead of it. He had to force Marcus's hand. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Helen uncovered something even more damning. Marcus hadn't just been spreading rumors. He had formally submitted a confidential candidate risk assessment to a crony of his on the Human Resources Oversight Committee. It was an official document, full of fabricated concerns and twisted half-truths, designed to permanently disqualify Leo from any position at the company. The document was a direct threat. It was a move designed to corner Arthur, to make it impossible for him to hire Leo without looking reckless and sentimental. Marcus was not just trying to win a job, he was trying to seize control of the narrative, to checkmate the CEO himself. Arthur looked at the damning report. The battle for his company's soul had officially begun, and the antagonist was not just some corporate rival, but a predator he had unwittingly invited into his own house. Arthur Vance sat in his office, the confidential report on his desk glowing on a tablet screen. Every line was a testament to Marcus Thorne's venomous ambition. It was a masterpiece of corporate assassination, full of innuendo and carefully selected data points designed to paint Leo Martinez as a reckless, untrustworthy gamble. Arthur felt a cold fury settle over him. He had built an empire, but he had failed to notice the rot spreading through its foundations. Marcus was not an anomaly. He was a symptom. He summoned Marcus to his office. The young man arrived promptly, his expression a perfect blend of deference and confidence. He clearly believed this was the meeting where he would be offered the job. "Marcus, have a seat," Arthur said, his voice dangerously calm. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "We need to discuss the junior project manager position." "Of course, Mr. Vance," Marcus said, leaning forward eagerly. "I'm very excited about the opportunity to contribute to the team." Arthur slid the tablet across the polished mahogany surface. "I came across this. A risk assessment on another candidate, Leo Martinez. It appears you took the initiative to compile it yourself. Tell me about it." For the first time, a flicker of panic crossed Marcus's face, but he recovered almost instantly. He adopted a somber, serious tone. "Mr. Vance, I did that to protect the company. My due diligence uncovered some troubling indicators. Financial instability in his family history, a lack of a blue-chip background. In a role with fiscal responsibility, I felt it was my duty to flag a potentially high-risk candidate. I was only thinking of the company's best interests." The justification was exactly what Arthur expected. A vile act cloaked in the language of corporate responsibility. The complete lack of remorse, the self-serving belief that his treachery was a virtue, was the final confirmation Arthur needed. "His father's bankruptcy?" Arthur asked, his voice low. "You thought that was relevant?" "It speaks to a potential lack of judgment under pressure," Marcus said smoothly, believing he was winning the argument. "Genetics and upbringing, Mr. Vance. They matter. This is a business, not a social services agency. We need winners." "Winners?" Arthur repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. "Let me tell you a story, Marcus. A few days ago, my car broke down. A classic Bentley, very valuable. I was stranded. Cars whizzed by, full of important people on their way to important meetings. No one stopped. They were all winners, I suppose, too busy to help an old man." He turned back to face Marcus, his eyes blazing with a fire Marcus had never seen. Then one person stopped. A young man in a cheap suit, on his way to the most important interview of his life. Right here, in this building. He sacrificed his one big chance to get his hands dirty and help a complete stranger. He didn't see a high-risk individual. He saw a human being in need. Arthur walked back to the desk and leaned his knuckles on it, his face inches from Marcus's. That young man was Leo Martinez, and the old man he helped was me. The color drained from Marcus's face. The carefully constructed world of his ambition crumbled into dust in a single, devastating moment. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You didn't do this to protect the company?" Arthur snarled, his voice a whip crack in the silent room. "You did this to eliminate a rival you had never even met, based on nothing but your own pathetic snobbery. You used a good man's family struggles against him. You embody everything that is wrong with this place. You are a cancer of greed and heartlessness, and I am cutting you out." He stood up to his full height. "You're fired, Marcus. Your access has been revoked. Security will escort you from the building. Now." Marcus stared, speechless and horrified. He was ruined, utterly and completely ruined. An hour later, Arthur sat in a small, clean but sparsely furnished living room. Across from him, on a worn-out sofa, sat Leo Martinez. Arthur had driven to his apartment himself and, after a moment of stunned silence at the door, Leo had let him in. So the old man with the Bentley, Leo began, his mind reeling. "Is Arthur Vance?" Arthur finished for him, his voice gentle. "And I am here to offer you my most sincere apology, Leo. What you sacrificed for me, and what was almost done to you in return, it's unforgivable." He then laid out the entire story. He told Leo about Marcus Thorne, the smear campaign, the so-called risk assessment, and the confrontation in his office. He spared no detail, wanting Leo to understand the full scope of the battle that had been waged in his name without his knowledge. Leo listened, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, and finally to a quiet, profound understanding. All the strangeness of the past few days, the old man's persistent interest, his probing questions, his enigmatic comments, it all snapped into focus. "I don't know what to say," Leo whispered, looking around his small apartment, at the eviction notice still taped to the fridge. His entire world had been turned upside down twice in 1 week. "You don't have to say anything," Arthur said, his gaze firm and unwavering. "But I have a proposition for you. The junior project manager job is yours, if you still want it. But I want to offer you something more. I want you to work directly with me. I'm starting a new initiative at Vance Innovations, one focused on community investment and ethical engineering. A division that measures profit not just in dollars, but in the good we do. I don't just need an employee, Leo. I need a partner. I need someone to help me tear down the culture that created Marcus Thorne and build something better in its place." He leaned forward, making a promise that was far more than a job offer. It was a commitment. "I will not let men like him define my company or your future. We are going to fix this. Together." For the first time in months, Leo Martinez felt the crushing weight on his shoulders begin to lift. It was replaced by something else, something he hadn't felt since he was a boy full of dreams. Hope. He looked at the powerful man before him, who was no longer a CEO or a legend, but a man offering him not just a job, but a restoration of faith. And he knew with absolute certainty what his answer would be. Arthur Vance had called an emergency all-hands town hall meeting. The company auditorium was buzzing with nervous energy and speculation. Rumors had been swirling for days since Marcus Thorne's abrupt and humiliating dismissal. No one knew what was happening, only that the foundations of the company felt like they were shifting. The board members sat in the front row, their faces grim masks of concern. They had been briefed on Marcus's firing, but not on what was to come next. Arthur walked onto the stage, not to the imposing marble lectern, but to the center, standing before them without notes, without a barrier. A single stool stood behind him, unused. The room fell silent. "Good morning," he began, his voice resonating with a calm authority that commanded attention. "For 40 years, I have stood before you and talked about profits, projections, and performance. We have celebrated victories and analyzed defeats, all through the lens of a balance sheet. We became one of the most successful companies in the world. But I have come to realize that we have been measuring the wrong things." He paused, letting the statement sink in. "A company is not a machine. It is a living organism. It has a heart. And I am afraid the heart of this company has grown sick. We have begun to prize ambition over integrity, ruthlessness over compassion. We started rewarding the loudest voice in the room, not necessarily the wisest. And I am responsible for letting that happen." He then told them the story of the flat tire. He didn't use his own name or Leo's. He spoke of an old man and a young man. He painted a vivid picture of the busy road, the expensive suit being laid aside, the grease-stained hands, and the monumental opportunity being willingly sacrificed for an act of simple human decency. The auditorium was rapt, caught in the spell of the simple, powerful parable. "The young man missed his interview," Arthur continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He went home believing he had failed, that his chance was gone forever. Meanwhile, another candidate, a man who represented everything we have mistakenly come to value, tried to destroy him. He dug into that young man's past and used his family's honorable struggles as a weapon to disqualify him, to ensure he never got a chance. He did this while claiming to be protecting the company. A murmur went through the crowd. The board members shifted uncomfortably. They knew he was talking about Marcus Thorne. This man, Arthur's voice boomed, believed that character was a liability. He was wrong. Character is our single greatest asset. It is the foundation upon which everything else must be built. Effective today, that will be the guiding principle of Vance Innovations. He then delivered the final, shocking reveal. The man who tried to sabotage a good person's future has been removed from this company. His way of thinking is no longer welcome here. He took a deep breath. And the young man who taught me, the CEO of this company, a lesson in humanity on the side of a road, I would like you to meet him. He turned and gestured towards the side of the stage. Leo Martinez walked out, dressed in a new, perfectly tailored suit that Arthur had insisted on buying for him. He looked nervous but resolute. He walked to Arthur's side, and the two men stood together, a portrait of two different generations united by a single, defining moment. "This is Leo Martinez," Arthur announced, his voice ringing with pride. "He is not just our new director of special projects and community initiatives. He is the new standard. He is a reminder of who we are supposed to be. Look at him. This is what integrity looks like." A stunned silence was followed by a ripple of applause that grew into a thunderous ovation. It was an ovation not just for Leo, but for the idea he represented. It was a release of pent-up desire for something more meaningful than share prices. In that moment, the culture of the company was reborn. The board members, seeing the overwhelming support, could only watch as Arthur Vance single-handedly remade his own legacy. In the front row, Helen dabbed a tear from her eye, a smile on her face. She looked at the two men on the stage, the old lion and the young man he had chosen, and saw the future. It was the legacy Eleanor Vance would have wanted. As photographers' flashes went off, capturing the image that would be on the front page of every business journal the next day, Arthur put a hand on Leo's shoulder. It was more than a welcome. It was the public passing of a torch, the formal anointing of a successor not of wealth or blood, but of character. The family of Vance Innovations was finally, truly, united under a new and better covenant. A year later, the Vance Innovations campus felt like a different world. The frantic, competitive tension that had once hummed through the hallways had been replaced by a collaborative buzz. Employees smiled more. They took lunch breaks in the newly built community garden on the roof. The change was palpable, and at its center were Arthur and Leo. They were rarely seen in the top-floor boardroom anymore. Today, they were in the prototype lab, sleeves rolled up, leaning over a set of blueprints with a team of young engineers. Leo was a transformed man. The worry that had haunted his eyes was gone, replaced by a calm, focused confidence. He moved with the easy authority of someone who had found his purpose. He wasn't just managing projects. He was mentoring people, championing ideas that had once been dismissed as too idealistic, and proving they could be both profitable and socially responsible. He had moved his sister into a new apartment and her nursing school tuition was fully paid. A quiet, personal victory that meant more to him than any corporate success. Arthur, too, was changed. The icy veneer of the reclusive tycoon had melted away. He laughed often. The profound loneliness that had shadowed him since Eleanor's passing had receded, replaced by the warmth of mentorship and renewed passion. He had found in Leo not just an employee, but the son he'd never had and a friend who shared his rediscovered values. He was no longer just building a company. He was nurturing a community. The most significant change was embodied by the announcement Arthur made at a press conference later that week. He stood at a podium, with Leo by his side, and unveiled his new legacy. "Today, I am proud to announce the formation of the Eleanor Vance Foundation," he said, his voice steady. Funded by a significant portion of the company's annual profits, this foundation will have one mission: to invest in people. It will provide scholarships for underprivileged students, fund small businesses in struggling communities, and offer second-chance grants to individuals who have faced hardship. It will reward the everyday acts of character that are the true bedrock of our society. This was his final, most profound act of redemption. He was using the vast wealth he had accumulated not for his own glory, but to right the wrongs of a system that overlooked people like Leo. He was transforming the engine of his corporate success into a force for good, creating a legacy that Eleanor would have been proud of. It was the ultimate tribute to her memory. That evening, as the sun set, Arthur led Leo out to the executive parking garage. There, gleaming under the lights, was the emerald green Bentley, restored to perfection. It shone like a jewel, a physical monument to the chance encounter that had changed everything. Arthur held out a set of keys. "She's yours," he said simply. Leo stared at him, stunned. "Arthur, I can't. This car is a part of your history. It's too much." "Nonsense," Arthur said, pressing the keys into Leo's hand. Its history was just sitting in a garage collecting dust. Its new history began on the side of a road with you. It belongs with you. He looked at Leo, his eyes full of a deep, paternal affection. "Eleanor would have loved you, son. She always believed that the best investments were in people." Leo closed his hand around the keys, feeling their cool, solid weight. He looked from the magnificent car to the old man whose life had become so intertwined with his own. He was no longer the desperate young man on his way to an interview. He was a leader, a partner, and a part of a family he had never expected. Arthur Vance had given him a job, a future, and a purpose. Arthur clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of profound contentment. "Some people spend their lives building empires of glass and steel," he said, looking towards the shining tower of his company. "We've decided to build one on character. It's a much stronger foundation,